from expressing his anger on Ngannou's contract to poking fun at his future boxing career. Here are Dana White's comments on Francis Ngannou's signing with the PFL. Dana White wasn't happy with Ngannou's new deal. Ever since Ngannou signed a new deal with PFL, the media has been bothering Dana with how he feels about the whole thing. In case you don't remember, the main reason White didn't want to sign a new deal with Francis was that he believed he was asking for a lot more money than he was worth. This ended with Dana refusing to sign a new deal with the fighter, and Ngannou moving on to better things. Fast forward to now, and Francis signed an insane deal with the PFL and is projected to make more money per fight than Dana would have ever paid him. As you can guess, once that piece of news became mainstream, everyone started bugging Dana at press conferences. White responded pretty harshly and said the deal doesn't make any sense to him. From what he can tell, the PFL is paying Ngannou millions of dollars to fight, at most, once a year. He mentioned how that sort of thing would never fly in the UFC. Honestly, it looks like Dana is salty about the fact that there's actually somebody out there who seems to value Francis more than he did. White also went on to imply that Francis is a coward. It seems like the reporters asking him the same thing over and over again is getting to Dana. This time around, he went ahead and threw some shade Francis's way. He said that he believes that Ngannou dipped from the UFC not just because of money, but because he was probably afraid of losing his title to Jon Jones. That's a pretty bold claim to make, even from Dana. He went on to talk about how Jones had completely destroyed Ciryl Gane, and that the same would have happened to Francis. While I don't think that's true, White certainly seems to feel that way. He mentioned how everyone else agrees with him. In saying all of this, he basically dismissed Ngannou's entire skill set and called him a trash fighter. For someone who used to be the heavyweight champion in his fight promotion, White doesn't seem to be too happy when they leave. If you ask me, this outburst seemed a bit immature on Dana's part. Somebody needs to sign White up for yoga classes, because this man clearly has a lot of pent-up tension, which begs the question, how would Ngannou have fared if he'd ended up facing Jon Jones? You know, Dana's been talking a lot of trash ever since Ngannou dipped from the UFC roster. He talks about how Jones would have demolished him. But there are a lot of other factors at play here, mainly the fact that Ngannou is almost as big, if not bigger, than Jon Jones. Francis weighed in at a whopping 250 pounds for his last fight, and he still had visible abs. That means if he simply wanted to overpower Jon, he'd just have to show up at his walking weight, and it would probably end up being the most challenging fight Jon has ever fought in. I'd compare punching Francis to punching a rock. While Jones would have ended up inflicting a ton of damage, he'd have hurt himself in the process as well. There's also the fact that Ngannou's jabs are known to have knockout power. In fact, there hasn't been any other fighter in UFC history who's wielded the same amount of power as Francis. The man could have landed a lucky jab and ended Jones's winning streak in an instant. So, if you ask me, Ngannou isn't the only one who was scared to fight Jones. If anything, Jon had a lot more to lose than Francis ever did. Every time Jon stepped into the ring the past decade, his entire legacy has been on the line. His opponents losing probably doesn't affect them much. However, his losing a fight would ruin his entire career. While we're still talking about Ngannou, let's talk about how he responded to all those jabs thrown by Dana. Ngannou isn't one to hold back, especially when someone throws shade his way. Still, it looks like he was letting a lot of Dana's comments slide, up until he started calling him a coward. He came out on Twitter to respond to Dana's comments and talked about how almost everything that his Xbox said was a white lie. Pun intended. The fighter started off by talking about the 3 fights thing. He mentioned that Dana himself said that he would try to get his fighters 3 fights a year. However, when Ngannou had asked for 1, he'd always been refused. As for all this talk about Francis being a coward, he said he'd agreed to defend his title and had won, despite suffering from a torn ACL. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, the fact that he was pretty heavily injured at the time and still ended up knocking his opponent out, well, It was nothing short of badass on his part. Finally, he talked about how, from what he could tell, Dana just couldn't bear to let him be happy with this new deal. Everything finally seems to be working out for him, and yet the guy can't get enough criticism about his decisions, which makes you wonder, should Dana really be saying all of this? Honestly, Dana should just quit while he's ahead. The facts are clear. He didn't want to pay Ngannou more money, and the fighter ended up getting exactly what he wanted. So for him to continue to talk trash about the man, well, it isn't very nice, now is it? There's also the fact that Francis tweeted about a challenge to Dana and spoke about how he's still willing to face off against Jon Jones, no matter what the venue is and what the date is. He also went on to question whether it was Dana who was the real scaredy cat in this situation. Now think about it. Ngannou versus Jones will probably be a big deal if it does end up happening. So, to pull the excuse that it won't generate enough hype or something is a pretty lame excuse. Honestly, it looks like Dana is scared that Jones might end up losing that fight, and it'll make him look bad in the eyes of the public. I kinda hope Francis beats Jones too. He definitely has it coming. With all those doping scandals he's been involved in, they haven't helped his case as the GOAT. Maybe if Ngannou knocks his head clean off his shoulders, it'll show him that he's not as invincible as he thinks he is. Speaking of White, he also mocked Francis's plans to enter the world of boxing. You thought he was done throwing shade? While most people are excited to hear about Ngannou entering the boxing gig, Dana doesn't seem too thrilled by the idea. And maybe it's because he lost one of his best fighters to a completely different sport, but lately, he's been mocking Ngannou's new career path every chance he gets. The last time a reporter asked him about his thoughts on Francis becoming a boxer, White called the whole thing a joke and said nobody's going to take this seriously, that it's just a bad decision to make for a UFC fighter like Francis. He even quoted Anthony Joshua and spoke about how he believes that the whole thing is a gimmick. Joshua came out and spoke about Francis potentially facing off against Wilder or Fury and said that he personally isn't looking to waste time on fights like these. In case you haven't been in the loop lately, Ngannou announced a while back that he plans to step into the ring as a boxer and face off against either Tyson Fury or Deontay Wilder. I'm not gonna lie, picking either of those two guys as his first boxing opponent isn't his smartest move. But then again, that doesn't mean that the fight won't be entertaining to watch. It's clear that no matter what Ngannou does, he's always going to have people hating on every move he makes. The best thing he can do right now is keep his head down and continue moving forward with his career. From what I can tell, we're about to see a whole new side of Ngannou in the years to come. So, from poking fun at his future boxing career to expressing his anger about Ngannou's contract, those were Dana White's comments on Francis Ngannou signing with the PFL.